Hip-hop has always been a genre built on appearances. The chains, the cars, the stacks of cash flashed on Instagram, all of it exists to sell a story of having made it. Because in this business, the perception of success often opens more doors than the success itself. But a flex is easy to fake, and it's a lot harder to sustain once the cameras stop rolling and the bills, the lawsuits, or the IRS come knocking. Some of the biggest names in rap have learned that the hard way, caught between the image they were selling the public and a financial reality happening quietly behind the scenes. This is what happens when the wealth is only real on camera. Bow wow. You'd assume a rapper flexing a private jet on Instagram is, at minimum, telling the truth about the plane. Not Bow Wow. In May 2017, at the height of his fame from growing up hip-hop Atlanta, Bow Wow posted a photo of a luxury car parked in front of a private jet with the caption, "Travel Day, NYC Press, run for growing up hip-hop." The problem was he'd actually boarded a regular commercial flight, and a fellow passenger spotted him crammed into a normal economy seat and posted a photo of it side by side with his jet flex. Caption, "Bow Wow on IG versus Bow Wow in real life." Internet sleuths then traced the original jet photo back to a stock image from a Fort Lauderdale limo company's website, hundreds of miles from where he actually was, meaning Bow Wow hadn't even used a real photo of himself. He'd borrowed someone else's marketing image and passed it off as his own travel day. It wasn't the first time either. Months earlier, he'd claimed he skipped an NFL private suite because he was too tired from filming, except fans quickly pointed out the Atlanta Falcons had a bye week that day, so there was no game to attend in the first place. The backlash birthed the viral Bow Wow challenge, where people posted a glamorous flex next to the mundane reality behind it, essentially turning Bow Wow's own lie into a meme format that outlived the controversy itself. Looking back on it years later, Bow Wow owned the moment, joking that fans only caught him this one time, and asking how many private jets he's actually been on since. Funny in hindsight, but it's a pretty clean blueprint for how the culture treats faking wealth online. Get caught, get roasted, keep it moving. But if a fake jet photo feels like a harmless flex gone wrong, the next case shows the same instinct still alive and well nearly a decade later. Waka Flocka flame. You'd assume telling a nightclub employee, "I'm worth $20 million, do you know who I am?" would at least be backed up by the actual number. Not quite, according to Waka Flocka flame. In July 2025, the rapper and his 14-person entourage got into a heated altercation with staff at the Surf Lodge in Montauk after being turned away from a side entrance during a fire marshal inspection. And Page 6 reported that Waka dropped the 8-figure line on a manager mid-argument. The only problem is that Celebrity Net Worth's public estimate for him sits at around $7 million, less than half of what he claimed in the moment. It's not the first time the gap between Waka's public image and his actual finances has surfaced either. Back in 2021, during an episode of his reality show, Waka and Tammy, he told his mother on camera that he hadn't worked a show in 3 months because of the pandemic and had lost millions of dollars in income as a result, admitting flatly that, "I go back to zero every year, Ma, and this year is not looking good." He even acknowledged the contradiction himself in the same conversation, saying his version of broke isn't the same as being actually broke, more a cycle of spending everything he makes and starting over. Nobody accused Waka of fraud or dragged him to court over any of it, but the pattern is the same one running through this entire list. A number thrown around in public that doesn't line up with the number sitting in the account. But if throwing out a number in the heat of an argument is embarrassing, the next case actually ended up in a federal courtroom. 50 Cent. You'd think a man who filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy would maybe stop posting pictures of himself in bed, covered in cash. Not 50 Cent. After being hit with a $7 million judgment over a leak tape involving Lastonia Leviston, Curtis Jackson filed for bankruptcy in July 2015, telling the court his expensive lawsuits and business losses, including more than $10 million lost across 2013 and 2014, had drained the fortune he'd built off Get Rich or Die Trying and years of endorsement deals. But his Instagram told a completely different story. He posted himself lying in bed surrounded by stacks of $100 bills, a refrigerator packed with cash, and one particularly infamous photo where he arranged piles of money to spell out the word broke. A Connecticut bankruptcy judge was not amused. Judge Ann Nevins ordered him into court in early 2016, specifically to explain the photos, saying she was concerned about allegations of non-disclosure and a lack of transparency in the case. Facing a judge who could unravel his entire bankruptcy protection, 50 Cent's team argued the cash in the photos was fake prop money, and he wrote in a court filing that appearing next to jewelry or cars didn't mean he actually owned any of it. He also admitted a diamond ring he'd posted online was borrowed from a jeweler for the photo, not something he'd purchased. After his court appearance, 50 Cent took to Instagram to vent about the process, writing that he had millions of dollars in my companies, the court knows this, and complaining that he was accused of committing fraud with nothing but an IG photo. He ultimately got through the bankruptcy process, but the image of a federal judge demanding a rapper explain his own Instagram is about as literal as rich only on camera gets. And that wasn't even the only fabricated windfall tied to his bankruptcy case. In January 2018, reports spread that 50 Cent had earned nearly $8 million in Bitcoin almost by accident after accepting the cryptocurrency as payment for his 2014 album Animal Ambition, and supposedly forgetting about it while the coin's value exploded. He leaned into the story on social media, posting that he was so proud of me, and the tale went viral as a feel-good windfall narrative. A few weeks later, in a sworn court filing tied to his bankruptcy case, he reversed course completely, stating under oath that he had never owned and does not own a Bitcoin account or any Bitcoins, and that all transactions tied to his brand had run through a separate third-party company. Asked why he let the false story spread in the first place, he was refreshingly blunt about it in the same filing, explaining that he generally doesn't correct press reports that make him look good, even when they're wrong. It's a small case on its own, but it lines up perfectly with everything else in his story. A public narrative engineered for image over accuracy, filed right alongside a bankruptcy case built on the opposite claim. Maybe faking wealth online doesn't feel so shocking once you consider the government eventually comes looking, regardless of what's actually true. And Nelly found that out the hard way. Nelly. You'd assume the man behind a Diamond certified album, one that sold over 10 million copies, wouldn't have tax problems most working people never come close to. Not Nelly. In September 2016, TMZ revealed the St. Louis rapper had been slapped with a federal tax lien of $2,412,283 for unpaid 2013 taxes, on top of a separate $149,511 lien from the Missouri Department of Revenue for the same year. The lien was large enough that his property and personal assets were legitimately at risk of seizure by the IRS. What made it sting even more was the timing. The lien surfaced just weeks after Country Grammar, his 2000 debut album, became just the 8th hip-hop album in history to receive Diamond certification from the RIAA, meaning it had sold over 10 million units. On paper, Nelly was a certified legend with one of the best-selling rap albums ever made. In reality, he owed the government millions of dollars he apparently didn't have on hand. Sources close to him said he was already working with the IRS to resolve the debt, and there's no indication he ever lost his home or had assets forcibly seized. Still, the optics were brutal. A diamond plaque in one hand and a multi-million-dollar federal debt in the other. A gap between reputation and reality that a lot of fans found hard to reconcile. Nelly at least avoided the worst-case scenario. The next rapper on this list wasn't so lucky, and his unpaid taxes actually landed him behind bars. Fat Joe. You'd assume the man behind Lean Back, one of the biggest rap singles of the 2000s, had his finances handled by somebody, anybody, not Fat Joe. In December 2012, Joseph Cartagena pleaded guilty to 2 counts of failing to file federal tax returns, admitting he hadn't reported gross income that prosecutors say exceeded $1.3 million in 2007, $1.4 million in 2008, and hundreds of thousands more in 2009 and 2010, all of it flowing through his companies, Terror Squad Production, and Miramar Music Touring. The total tax loss to the government came out to $718,038. He faced up to 2 years in federal prison. At sentencing, in June 2013, U.S. Magistrate Judge Kathy Waldor showed him some leniency, crediting him for paying back roughly $718,000 before the hearing and for charitable work that included donating computers to local schools, and gave him 4 months in prison instead of the maximum. Fat Joe blamed the failures on his accountant, but ultimately accepted responsibility, apologizing to his family and supporters in court before turning himself in that August. He served his time, kept his career going afterward, and has since talked about the case publicly as a cautionary tale about not paying attention to your own finances, even when the checks are clearly coming in. If Fat Joe's 4 months feels like a wake-up call, the next case shows what happens when that same mistake gets stretched across 5 straight years instead of 2. Ja Rule. You'd assume a rapper who scored a Grammy nomination and sold nearly 20 million albums would have an accountant handling something as basic as filing his taxes. Not Ja Rule. Jeffrey Atkins pleaded guilty in 2011 to 3 counts of failing to file tax returns with the IRS, admitting he hadn't filed for 5 straight years from 2004 through 2008 on income that included at least $3 million earned between 2004 and 2006 alone from music royalties and touring through his companies, ASJA Inc. and Rule Tours Inc. The total loss to the government came to more than $1.1 million. At sentencing that July, he appeared in court in a yellow prison jumpsuit, already serving a separate 2-year sentence for a weapons conviction, and was handed an additional 28 months to run concurrently. "I in no way attempted to deceive the government," he told the judge, adding through tears that he didn't know how to deal with these finances and never had anyone properly guiding him. U.S. Magistrate Judge Patty Schwartz wasn't fully sympathetic, telling him plainly that taxpayers do not have the luxury of deciding whether to comply with laws. He later pushed back on the public narrative in interviews. interviews, insisting he did pay taxes, just not enough, and pointed to fallout with his old label, Murder Inc., and problems with his accountant as the root of the mess. Whatever the explanation, the math was the same as everyone else on this list, millions in real earnings, and still not enough handled correctly to stay out of a cell. If unpaid taxes can take down two separate platinum selling rappers, imagine what happens when someone spends money that was never sustainable to begin with, and nobody's story captures that better than MC Hammer. MC Hammer. You'd think making close to $70 million off You Can't Touch This would set someone up for life, not MC Hammer. At his commercial peak in the early 90s, Hammer bought a 40,000 square foot mansion in Fremont, California for $12 million, then poured another $30 million into renovating it, adding gold-plated front gates inscribed with Hammer Time, a gold hot tub, marble statues of himself, a bowling alley, 2 swimming pools, tennis courts, and a 17-car garage. He kept a 200-person entourage on payroll, costing him between $500,000 and $1 million every single month just in salaries. He also owned close to 20 luxury cars, a private jet, a helicopter, and 21 racehorses, some valued near $1 million each. None of it was fake. He genuinely owned all of it, which somehow makes the collapse hit harder. By April 1996, with his music career cooling off and expenses nowhere near slowing down, Hammer filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy, listing roughly $10 to $13 million in debt against assets worth a fraction of that. The bank sold his dream mansion for just $6.8 million, a steep drop from the tens of millions he'd sunk into it. The cars, the plane, and the horses were gone almost overnight, and the 200-person entourage disappeared just as fast. Hammer never really hid his wealth. The difference is he genuinely believed the empire was sustainable until the math caught up with him, which might be an even harder lesson than getting caught faking it outright. Years later, sitting in the same mansion while it waited to be sold off, he reflected on how disconnected he'd become from the home itself, admitting he'd barely used the marble steam room and had probably never even sat on the living room couch, despite spending tens of millions building it. He also said he genuinely believed he could have lived out of a shoebox as long as he had a nice suit for every day of the week, which makes the $30 million renovation an even harder decision to square with the man who made it. Hammer's downfall was at least his own money going up in smoke. The next case is what happens when a label boss builds a billionaire image off of everybody else's money too. Birdman. You'd assume the CEO of a label responsible for Drake, Nicki Minaj, and Lil Wayne would have no trouble covering a single loan. Not Birdman. For years, Brian Birdman Williams cultivated an image of untouchable Cash Money Records wealth, flashing chains, cars, and a lifestyle that matched his reputation as one of hip-hop's biggest moguls. But in 2015, Lil Wayne filed a $51 million lawsuit against Cash Money and Birdman, alleging the label had withheld an $8 million advance and additional payments owed for the long-delayed Thought Carter 5, and accusing Birdman of failing to make required royalty and escrow payments going back years. Wayne's team later claimed Birdman had squandered as much as $70 million of a $100 million advance from Universal Music Group, and producers like DVLP and Manny Fresh separately said they'd been stiffed on payments too, pointing to a pattern that stretched back to Cash Money's earliest days in New Orleans. Then in December 2017, Birdman's financial reality caught up with him publicly. A company called EMG Transfer Agent revealed he'd defaulted on a $12 million loan he'd taken out in 2015 against his 20,000 square foot Miami mansion, one he'd bought for $14.5 million in 2012. The lender filed a foreclosure lawsuit, and by 2019, Birdman was ordered to hand over the keys, with a court-appointed receiver seizing control of the property and everything inside it, while the case escalated into a $20 million judgment fight. Birdman denied wrongdoing throughout and claimed the loan itself was a sham, but the outcome was the same either way. The man whose empire was built on flashing wealth couldn't hold on to the house he'd used to prove it. Wayne eventually settled his suit for an 8-figure payout and walked away from Cash Money entirely, while Birdman's reputation for not paying people finally caught up to his own bottom line. Rival label boss Rick Ross didn't let the moment pass quietly either, publicly mocking Birdman over the foreclosure and pointing out that a man who hadn't had real money in years had still gone out and taken on a second loan against a house he couldn't actually afford, sarcastically offering to lend him the difference himself. But if you thought Birdman not paying people was bad, the next two cases show what happens when a famous face gets used to actively pull money out of other people's pockets. DJ Khaled. You'd assume the self-proclaimed "we the best mogul" with a bathrobe empire and a catalog of platinum records wouldn't need a side hustle promoting random tech startups on Snapchat. Not DJ Khaled. In 2017, a company called Centra Tech paid Khaled $50,000 to promote his cryptocurrency initial coin offering, and he called it a game changer across his social media accounts, without disclosing that he'd been paid to say it. Boxer Floyd Mayweather did the same thing for a larger fee, telling his followers to get in on the token before it sold out, and joking he should be called Floyd Crypto Mayweather. The ICO ended up raising roughly $32 million from investors. Before it came out, the Centra's claimed partnerships with Visa and MasterCard were fabricated, and its listed CEO was a fictional person built around a stock photo. The company's actual founders were later criminally charged and eventually sentenced to federal prison for running the scheme. In November 2018, the SEC settled charges against both celebrities for illegally touting the coin offering without disclosing they'd been paid, and Khaled agreed to pay $152,725 in penalties and disgorgement, while Mayweather paid over $600,000. Neither man admitted wrongdoing, and Khaled agreed not to promote any securities for 2 years as part of the deal. The SEC's own statement on the case put it plainly, warning investors that celebrity endorsements on social media are paid promotions, not investment advice, a lesson that came a little too late for the people who'd already put their money into a coin backed by nothing but a famous name. T.I. If Khaled and Mayweather getting fined for a paid promotion feels like a slap on the wrist, the next case involved a rapper who wasn't just promoting the coin, he helped build it. You'd assume a platinum-selling rapper and actor with movie credits and a reality show wouldn't need to lean on cryptocurrency hype to make money. Not T.I. In August 2017, T.I., real name Clifford Harris Jr., partnered with businessman Ryan Felton to launch a digital currency called Flick Token, pitched as the backbone of a Netflix-style streaming platform. Investors were told the token, priced at 6 cents each, would climb to nearly $15 within 15 months, and Felton reportedly hinted that billionaire Mark Cuban was involved, while comedian Kevin Hart publicly promoted the project on social media. 25 investors ended up pouring more than $1.3 million into Flick based largely on T.I.'s name and reputation attached to the launch. The token did briefly spike to 21 cents before collapsing to a fraction of a cent by August 2018, wiping out most of what investors had put in. In November 2018, that group of 25 investors filed a lawsuit against T.Y. and Felton, seeking at least $5 million, alleging the two had used celebrity endorsements and misleading claims to inflate the token's price before selling off their own holdings once the value rose, then let it crash once they'd cashed out. Felton attempted to shift blame by claiming some of the sell-off came from T.I.'s family members who'd received tokens as gifts and cashed out on their own, but the underlying accusations stayed the same, using a famous face to sell everyday fans on a wealth-building opportunity that mostly built wealth for the people running it. But if you thought watching investors lose their money to a celebrity-backed crypto scheme was rough, the next case shows what happens when money problems compound alongside addiction, and the ending isn't one anybody can joke about. DMX. You'd assume selling over 70 million records and dropping 5 consecutive #1 albums between 1998 and 2003 would leave a rapper financially secure for the rest of his life. Not DMX. At his peak, Earl Simmons was one of the biggest names in hip-hop, commanding millions per film roll alongside a run of chart-topping albums few artists have ever matched. But behind that success, DMX was already drowning. In 2013, he filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy, reporting only about $50,000 in assets against $1 to $10 million in debt, a staggering gap for someone whose music had generated tens of millions of dollars over his career. Much of it stemmed from $1.24 million in overdue child support for his large family, on top of mounting tax debt. Around the same period when DMX left Def Jam Recordings in the mid-2000s, Jay-Z, who ran the label at the time, reportedly wrote off roughly $12 million in unpaid debt DMX owed, rather than pursue it, an act of goodwill that still didn't come close to solving the underlying problem. In 2017, he was charged with 14 counts of tax evasion and served a year in prison. And by the time he was released in 2019, his IRS debt had climbed to $2.3 million. Court filings from this period showed him reporting just $50 in cash on hand and 0 personal property of value. No electronics, no jewelry, no car. This case carries more weight than the others on this list because DMX's financial collapse was never really separate from his long public struggle with addiction, and both ran alongside each other for most of his adult life. When he died in April 2021, following a heart attack, his estate was still estimated at well under $1 million, despite a legendary discography that sold in the tens of millions. It's a reminder that behind the loudest, most successful sounding career on this list was a man who never actually got to experience the financial security his talent should have guaranteed him. If DMX's story shows how money problems and personal struggle can quietly run together for years, the final case on this list shows what happens when that same pattern gets tangled up with violence, and the fall becomes as total as it gets. Suge Knight. You'd assume the co-founder of a label that generated an estimated $750 million over a decade, one responsible for Dr. Dre's The Chronic, Snoop Dogg's Doggy Style, and Tupac's All Eyes on Me, would be set for life regardless of what happened next. Not Suge and Knight. Knight co-founded Death Row in 1991 with the explicit goal of building what he called the Motown of the 90s, and for a few years it actually looked like he'd pulled it off. At Death Row Records' peak in the mid-90s, Knight's personal net worth was estimated between $100 and $200 million. Funded by a run of multi-platinum albums and a reputation as one of the most powerful and most feared executives in the music industry. But the same aggressive business style that built Death Row also buried it. In 2002, the IRS assessed Knight with a $6.5 million tax debt. Then in 2005, a Los Angeles court awarded a $107 million judgment against him to Lydia Harris, who claimed Knight had cheated her and her ex-husband out of a 50% stake in the label they said they helped start. Unable to pay, both Knight personally and Death Row Records filed for bankruptcy in April 2006. His personal filing listed assets of $0 to $50,000 against debts exceeding $100 million, and Death Row's masters, publishing rights, and the label's name were eventually sold off at a bankruptcy auction in 2009 for just $18 million, a fraction of what the catalog was actually worth. By that point, Knight's financial collapse had become inseparable from a long trail of legal trouble, and in 2018, he pleaded no contest to voluntary manslaughter after running over and killing a man during an altercation on a Compton film set in 2015. A case that resulted in a 28-year prison sentence from a man once worth hundreds of millions of dollars to reportedly having around $200 in a personal bank account. At the time of his bankruptcy filing, Suge Knight's collapse stands as the most extreme version of the pattern on this entire list. A fortune that looked untouchable from the outside, while the foundation underneath it was already gone. What ties every one of these stories together isn't stupidity or even greed exactly. It's the pressure to keep performing success long after the money stopped backing it up. Rap has always sold aspiration, and that comes with real financial danger once the image outruns the bank account. Whether that means a rapper's own spending, unpaid taxes catching up years later, a label boss withholding money from everyone around him, a celebrity endorsement that turns out to be a paid lie, or a fortune quietly buried under debt while the world assumes it's still there. None of this excuses the dishonesty in cases like Bow Wow's fake jet or 50 Cent's staged cash, but it does explain why the pattern keeps repeating generation after generation, because the industry has never really stopped rewarding the appearance of success over the reality of it. And if you enjoyed this one, you'll definitely want to check out these videos on your screen next. Have a good one.